Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's good to be with you here in December. Man, it is hard to believe it's almost the end of the year. But anyway, it is. And so 2020 is almost behind us, thank goodness. Now, the point of Power Lunch Live is that we have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world that we can learn from in what we do. So today is no exception. Max Kirby is a thought leader in digital identity and data privacy. We're going to talk about him in just a second. But the program is interactive. The way that happens is if you get online, you type a message to us here on the LinkedIn chat or Facebook or YouTube or any of those places where we're broadcasting, Twitter as well. We monitor those feeds. And so send us your question so that we can get answers to your questions. And I'm sure Max is happy to answer questions from you today. Now, if you like the program, give it a like or share so that your network can benefit from these conversations and obviously so we can grow a little bit. But anyway, today, like I said, Max Kirby's our guest. He's a thought leader in digital identity and data privacy. He leads cloud solutions of Publicis Groupe at the Publicis Groupe. Players in the agency world. He's helping his clients adapt to new technologies and data privacy laws as they come out. He's also a big believer in the next phase of the internet, which is the decentralized web. We'll talk about that today to get a better understanding of what that means. Max, welcome.
Hi, Rhett. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's good to have you on. We've been trying to connect here for a few weeks, and so I'm glad we finally got on.
Glad we made it happen.
That's been mostly my fault, but nonetheless, I'm glad to have you because as we get through COVID and everything, and things kind of come back to normal or whatever that means or whatever that's going to look like, you got to start thinking about, and for a lot of us, we never stop thinking about these things, but there's so much advancement in technology going on. I mean, it's just really rapid, hard to up with in a lot of ways. Talk about a little bit about the proliferation of biometrics and sensors and the public cloud and AI and how the gaps in our laws and it is
catching
up, right? There are gaps, right? And that means that companies can exploit and use our data in ways that maybe we don't agree with or don't want. Talk about that and where are those gaps and what's being done to sort of try for the laws to catch up, for the legal system and the Congress and the legislatures around this country to catch up on data privacy and all that. I know that's a massive loaded question, but
yeah, it's a question that has a lot of facets to it, and that I think we're seeing many more people in different industries having to ask this question, especially after this year, when basically this has become a sort of forced proof of concept of digital transformation by any other name. And so the way that I would kind of contextualize this for folks who aren't necessarily in the space and people watching who are going, what's digital identity? And you're hearing the term data privacy in the news. And it's because of the tension between an analog precedent-based set of laws confronting this new technology that we now have. And if you take a step back and think about what the internet does, at least up until now, the big platforms that run the web are designed to understand what you're about and then offer that in the form of advertising to people who are looking to get a brand message in front of you. And we needed that because after the dot-com bust, all of the great ideas about how to use the internet that were still great ideas and that we're actually coming back around to now, they didn't have consumer behavior behind them. But now that we're used to this and all of the things that come with this, like getting our content for free and being able to type into a search engine and whatever comes back we consider to be generally true, now we're starting to see the internet have to shift a bit from what carried it up until now, because we're a little bit over the progress mark where we should have started evolving these laws, and it's just going to take some time to catch up. I mean, the biggest principled issue right now is whether or not you actually understand what's going on in the data space enough to consent to whatever a company is now under the law supposed to get you to consent to. But how many times do you have to explain technology when you want to go deep on a subject like this? How many people are actually able to engage with it very quickly? So that's the main tension, is these pop-ups that you're seeing when you come onto a site and saying, please consent. Is clicking yes actually consent? Or do you really just not know what you're doing and you want that pop-up to go away, and so you're going to click the button?
I mean, I totally get that. But I kind of feel like, I mean, aren't you consenting? Well, let's just take Facebook, right? When I post something on Facebook, how can I, in all honesty, have any degree of faith that doesn't go where, I mean, that data, that stuff that I'm giving them, but that data that I'm giving them is not being, I mean, I believe, and I know when I post something that it's out there, right?
Yep.
I tell my kids that all the time, right? You don't have any degree of faith that you have any privacy in that whatsoever.
Yeah.
So why is there even a discussion? Why? I mean, to me, it's like you give that up the minute you post on a platform like that, right? The minute go ahead.
Yeah, you do. No, you do. And no one reads the terms and conditions, right, to actually understand what's going on here. So it's easy to think that there is no such thing as privacy. Really, we can't really achieve it. Once it's out there, it's out there. Everybody knows my face, my name. And that's incidentally true right now, but that doesn't have to be true. And that's where all of the work is starting to go into privacy, because there's one study that we did that pulled at the core of this issue, and it was really understanding whether or not people knew what platforms understand about them. And the reports of people who are uncomfortable, it wasn't about knowing things that you knew they know, if you follow me. Like if you know that they know that and you know what they know, you're okay. The issue comes when they know something that you don't know they know about you. And that's where it can also be very, very persuasive. So if I send you an ad that happens to know that you're looking for, let's say a handbag, and I know you're in the market for a handbag, but you don't know I know you're in the market for a handbag, the message that comes up that says, we're thinking about this for you. You get this impression naturally as a person. You go, this site must know, it must be for me, this site, right? They must know what I'm looking for. But you don't know that they actually know explicitly that you were looking for a handbag. And the flip side of this, Rhett, is that ad that follows you around the internet after you purchased a handbag and will not stop, because no one has turned on, in the age of what we call the suppression media, you suppress media that you don't want to fire. And no one's thinking about the transaction system needing to connect into that system and say, they already bought it, calm down. Also, I'll just underpin this by saying, like, Rhett, imagine the amount of money that is spent on ads every year that's just a complete waste of money. It's an economist would call it a true market failure, right? I don't want to see that ad. I'm not going to engage with it. I'm not going to do anything with it. You basically just threw money into the internet, and there's no reason for me to get into this. So to your question, it's easy to think that this doesn't exist because of how good the internet is at certain things, how bad it is at other things. But that's where this emerging technology and people who are fighting back is beginning.
Well, what I got to ask, what do they know that I don't want them to know? I mean, what do they know? What I mean,
I'll need your social security number, your phone number, and I can look it up. So they know things that they have as probabilities, and this is part of the issue. It's very hard to actually know that you're looking for a handbag. What they know is that you've looked at handbags over and over and over, and you seem to be in the market.
So they know that I'm going to LL Bean to look at shirts or pants or shoes or whatever, right?
Yeah, right. And before the privacy laws, if you went to 4 or 5 different brand sites, there could be some technology in the background of those sites all sharing notes. What did he click on over here? What did he click on over there? And getting a better picture of you, but it's mostly probabilistic, not deterministic. It's rare that you go to something and say, I would like to buy a handbag. We are seeing some people start to just ask people and make it, on their terms and open to them and consensual. There's a court case in privacy law that's famous with lawyers. They'd understand when you say you have no expectation of privacy in an open field. Basically says if I go out into an open public place and I say I'm Max Kirby and this is my phone number, there's no reasonable expectation that I don't want anyone to know that.
Right.
There's another court case where somebody said some incriminating things, but they were in a phone booth, and this was the key. They closed the door to the phone booth, and the court ruled that means that your expectation of your right to privacy exists. If you're in the US, that's the Constitution. If you're in the EU, that's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that gives you those rights. But you have to, it's not like you have to activate these rights. They're rights. You can't, they're there. But if you go into an open field, you can't at the same time expect them. So the question before a lot of the courts right now is, if the phone isn't a booth, it's in your pocket, how do we deal with the expectation of privacy?
Great question. And where are those laws going to come down on? I mean, on that, you think?
So I think there's the papers that are winning a lot of hearts and minds are the ones that are getting down to the principles of privacy. So there was one recently submitted in kind of a contest for privacy technology, and it was about informed consent. And that, I think, is what we're going to see. We're going to see a layman's explanation being more necessary. So you can imagine a world where instead of a terms and service, really deep legalese document, there's an explainer video that your kids could maybe engage with to say, this is what happens when you click on these buttons. I don't know how far enough is there. That's a question that's facing all of us. But at the technology angle of things, we're looking into ways to preserve at least the necessary conditions of doing something like that. So there's been an explosion of sandbox experiments. There's things called privacy sidecars, federated learning, machine learning on the edge, so that people are not sharing data, they're sharing the insights that come from it, and that's all we need. But fundamentally, we're trying to finesse this issue, the privacy issue, and the fact that, look, if you are in the market for handbags, right? If someone were to send you 5 offers for handbags with coupons attached to them, you'd probably welcome that. So there is a good side of this, right? If you want to take the positive angle, I mean, the internet was a great tool. We need these things, but now we're a little bit over where the law can understand, and the catch up is like, I mean, I watch a lot of C-SPAN, and it's gotten a lot better in the last 2 years. But if you remember the congressional testimony where it's like, okay, we need to have at least better consultants, maybe some people in law who also have engineering degrees. I think that's coming, and I think once we get there, we'll see a better outcome.
You talked a little bit about, and other things I've seen about erasing your digital footprint. Is that even possible?
To some extent, yeah. Okay. To some extent, the best way is to make less data, but
and why would you do that? Is there a benefit to that?
There is. I mean, privacy. The benefit of privacy, I think, you have to intrinsically understand. I mean, it's like you wouldn't want people knowing you on anything but your terms. Is the best way to understand that. So it can be embarrassing. It can be exposing. It can be what we refer to when we mean creepy, which the best way I can quantify creepy for you, I think we're getting closer to understanding it, is if you're asking me a question that has nothing to do with my expectation of our relationship, that's creepy. So when we tell CXO leaders about this, we say, if you're a shoe company, ask about shoe sizes. Do not ask for social security numbers. If you're a bank, don't ask about shoe sizes, right? So it has to be close semantically to the value that customer is expecting to get from you. And if you apply that principle, the problems with privacy, where it goes wrong, is when people know things about you, you don't know it about them. And then the question is, are you making decisions, or are you really just being nudged into making decisions?
Are we going to get to a point where this all factors into things like job decisions and where you're evaluated online with all your data, and the company makes a job decision or a hiring decision or a health insurance decision about you. Is that it? Are we going to get to the point where we're in that kind of dilemma, or we're in that kind of point? I guess.
I think we're already there, Rhett. I think we're there. I mean, you know, the thing. This is another thing that the pandemic has really put some pressure on. But all of the workplace productivity tools that we're using, and moving away from email, you know, some of the major acquisitions happening in the last 2 weeks. You think about what's going on there. I mean, it's the you know, and I've been in these conversations from an M&A perspective. The way that you're acquiring companies in the tech industry right now is usually, if not entirely, based on the data that they either have or they have access to, the data acquisition, if you will. Those tools throw off a lot of information about us. And the best way to understand this piece of the puzzle is you are different.
Slack throws off information about us?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when, what, how often? I mean, Microsoft was just I think they did the right thing, but for the record, they just walked away from a productivity score from Microsoft Teams. And I think that reflects how important privacy is becoming to these companies, because it's becoming important to us. But you know, think about the identity that you have for a second, Rhett. Right, what you are right now on the show is going to be slightly different from who you are maybe to your kid, or while you're, you know, pursuing a hobby. Your work identity, the mask that we all wear at work, and the words we use, right? That's a different identity compared to you as a person. But the same thing that's happened to you as a person, understanding what you want to buy and what you're into, that's now happening to your workplace identity. And so there's a lot of things we have to navigate around. And the privacy principles that companies are publishing, they're mostly in the B2C space right now. We're just now seeing the pressure point on all of the workplace productivity tools and your work identity.
So it really goes beyond just what your social media profiles say, and that party you went to into the keg stand. That it comes back to more than just that sort of that kind of stuff. Now it's actually, it sounds like what you're talking about is productivity scores and analyzing your work performance in a way.
Yeah, and I think there can be good. Again, there's two sides to this. There's good that could come of that in a big way. Data is just information, right? Data can be scary, but it's just information. What's the difference between a manager who really, really knows his or her people versus a system that has data that gets close to knowing people? And the issue is at its core, computers don't forget, and they don't have consciences. They don't have personalities, right? So you can only go so far in this space before you start to lose the human touch, and that's important. That's something that we don't want to let go of. But at the same time, there's a lot of reasons to understand productivity. I mean, that's something that we all have to do. And if we're going to be able to use data, we will.
No, we all struggle with it. I don't know a company that doesn't struggle with trying to better understand what productivity, you know, their people's productivity. And so, I mean, it sounds like there's some usefulness in that from a management perspective, but also some danger there that we have to be aware of. What is the decentralized web? You know, you hear that, I hear that a lot. Can you explain that in sort of layman's terms?
So the decentralized web is sort of what it sounds like. Instead of a big database that has everything about everyone, you're talking about a federated, decentralized, more of a mesh sort of concept where the information is in pockets or on the edge of it, but it's not balanced such that all of that information is queryable in one kind of master brain that sees everything. So a concrete way of thinking about the decentralized web, let's take the workplace example we were just talking about. A normal centralized web would have that database that has all the productivity scores and the kind of unfeeling touch of the queries that you could run to figure out things about people. The decentralized web would have an interface for you, Rhett, to see your own productivity. That sounds like something we'd all be interested in and understand it. And then a way for permissions to be set up such that if there's sharing, that sharing either happens on your terms. At the furthest end of the spectrum, you have permission, which is you cannot do unless, and then all the other side, which is notified. So it's going to be shared, but we're letting you know that that's happening. Either way, you're involving, the other party. And this is why it all comes down to identity, and what you don't know, other people know. Because if my company were to expose what they know about me and my productivity, I would probably be interested in that myself. And I think that's fair. It's the fact that it's not necessarily hidden and it's on one set of policies, one major database. That's when we start to get that creepy factor, because we don't necessarily know if we want to be known in that way, or at least we want to know about it if we have to be. So the decentralized web are technologies that are trying to make it so that you have a seat at the table, and that some amount of either your consent or your permission or your notification is involved in the information that we all get to use.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think, let's say LinkedIn, for example, is going to at some point rate us in our profession or in our field? Is that
Uber has, right? I mean, there's the rider score. I tell people, be careful what you say on customer service lines these days, because they're all being recorded even while you're on hold or mute or the music is playing. So if you're bashing the customer service person in that moment, that's showing up. And there's NLU and NLP that are working on understanding, that's natural language systems to pick up what you're saying. So so this is where, Rhett, I'll probably give you an answer to this question that isn't right down the middle, but it's for a good reason. And that's because it's not about what they're gonna do. It's about what they can do, right? So can LinkedIn do something like that? Sure. They could. They could, do it for a number of reasons. Will they? I think that if you do this the right way, there's some will they's that I'm not worried about. For instance, to understand how their platform is performing, or understand who's the biggest influencer, or understand how the graph is developing, or look at aggregate insights. Okay. To understand my productivity, my ability to make relationships, your connections, who knows who at a more specific level, you start to get that issue. So will they, won't they? It's more about can they not, and the middle ground is they can and will, but they have to involve you in this conversation. And I think that's where we're going with the law, is to say, whatever you're going to do with information about me, if information is power, which it is, I have to be involved in that conversation, or you at least need to give me an understanding of what you're going to do, so that when I say you can go ahead and do that, the other, just to make it difficult on everyone, Rhett, the other side of this argument, which I'm not on, but I can see merit in, is back to that open understanding, or expectation of privacy in an open field. If there's a camera pointed at that field picking up what I'm saying, fair's fair, right? I can't go back and say, I didn't mean to say that. So this is where the struggle is, because the law is based off of physical things, right? Your house versus a public area. That's easy. That's cut and dry. The digital world, not so cut and dry. And it doesn't even really physically exist, except for where you store the data is the closest thing. The term data sovereignty, where the data is actually stored. I'll just say one more thing about this. This is going to have to be solved much quicker than we thought it would be. We recently saw the data shield protections, which is a governing document that handles how North America, US, and EU share data across. And when that was revoked, all of these data sets that were being shared are still in some cases being shared or stopped, just caused threw a lot of things into haywire. So I think we're going to see a lot more attention coming to this issue, but there is no precedent right now for what is your house versus a public open field in the digital world.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I look at this and I see just massive changes in a lot of different industries. I mean, you look at for example, the insurance industry, right? I mean, my driving habits are ultimately, I mean, probably not very, and it's already happening actually, but more and more, every time I get in the car, my insurance rates are going to fluctuate depending on how fast I'm driving, or right, or how much I drive. I mean, you're going to really be able to. I mean, my Apple Watch monitors what my heart rate and my blood pressure and everything else, right? That's going to ultimately, I know it's going to lead to insurance, right?
Yep.
It's going to lead to lifestyle. It's going to lead to people making decisions on what my life insurance premiums are, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's where that's going, and I don't see a way to stop that. I don't know how, you know.
There are technologies that I'm very hopeful about. We can talk about a few of them, but conceptually, for a moment, so that everyone's following, the way to think about this is asymptotically. So what you're talking about, Rhett, and when that first came out, that was interesting. It was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. I can maybe get better rates on my insurance, and that's usually how it starts. Taking it to the nth degree of every decision you make, every behavior you exhibit, goes into an overall understanding about what you're worth on an actuarial table compared to the cost of insuring you. This is where not knowing certain things is, it's part of how we as humans want to live. We are not machines, and they will, and that will start to happen. I mean, I'll give you both sides again. There's someone who I'm working with that used a very large data collection network to be able to identify, this is in a business insurance context, where people were twisting out their backs, where injury cases were being claimed. And then they actually called that, in this case, distribution center, and said, hey, we're getting a lot of claims about twisted backs. What's going on here? And here are all of the people and the patterns. And so they were able to identify that actually there's this step in the process that was not right. They were making people reach, a kinesthesiologist could explain this better, but they were making people reach up and to the right and then go down and to the left. And so that's how you twist your back out. So there's a good side of this. The tricky part is if you take it to the nth degree, the question that you have to confront yourself with is, if I'm getting charged less and less, let's say, for certain behaviors, when are those behaviors coerced? And there's huge problems when we think about income inequality in this context, because if you need to save money versus you don't have to save money, that coercion, at least in my mind, goes up or down accordingly. And some people say that's okay. Some people say that's really not okay. I mean, this is the stuff of, I started in philosophy, and I remember we were debating this, back when I was pursuing my degree at the University of Virginia, and we were talking about what happens when cars drive themselves, and all of it was theoretical, and now it's real, and now we're coming up on this. So I think if there's any hope I can give everyone, it's that there are people saw this coming. There are lots of people who knew instinctively that the second that the car could understand what you're doing, if you take that to the nth degree, we have a problem here. And this is where sci-fi plays a huge place in our culture. There's a lot of books that I think everyone should read just to kind of understand or imagine. Okay? But sci-fi's already kind of dealt with this issue. I mean, everyone in the US and hopefully the Western world, I think, has read 1984. I could consider 1984 sci-fi, but getting into the Culture series, which is a really good one, and I recommend it to anyone listening. A lot of folks recommend that. I didn't know until I started reading it, but it goes even further out into the future, and it posits this idea that this is just the tricky spot. This is the tough part. Mm-hmm. We're actually going to break through, and everyone knowing everything about you is going to be a good thing in the future. And so this is where you have to speculate of how far do we push it. And I think the decisions that we need to make as business leaders, as policy leaders, if you're looking at what's happening in politics, even just as an informed citizen, the decision we need to make is, how do we want this to develop? Because there's totally our ability to push this out way too far. And I would encourage everybody to start becoming more of a privacy advocate about it, just to start slowing things down and making the decisions much more deliberate. Because the technology pace it's not even fair to law. I mean, no way. So we're going to have to artificially slow this down, and that's going to be hard for some people. And it sounds like cutting innovation. I was having this debate just recently with a really good friend of mine who went into a healthcare company. I said, look, these health passes that are coming out in the pandemic, there's some potentially terrifying implications and potential abuses of those types of things. And we all know that, right? He said, yeah, but somewhere you can't really get mad at a concert hall for saying, hey, I want to know that everybody who's coming to this concert has had a vaccine, because otherwise I can't have this concert and I can't open back up, and that's my business. So we're going to have to confront these things right here, right now. And I think the time to get your voice out there. People in politics do not have engineering degrees. They don't have these backgrounds. So I would tell you, this is where you really want to pay attention. And millennials and Gen Z, the digital natives out there who have been part of this, nobody's going to do this unless you do. Every time you help your grandfather or your grandmother with your email, you need to remember what I'm telling you about the lawmaking part of society. So it's a warning and it's a call to action. But I think that the technologies that are building the decentralized web give me a lot of hope, and I'm an optimist about this space.
And it sounds, I never really thought about it in the context, but I mean, it does sound like there's some health equity issues and some racial justice issues and social. I mean, there's some things that we need to be really careful of there that may widen the gap even more in some of those areas. And so, but also could solve some of those problems. But we have to do it right.
You have to be careful. There's it's a good friend of mine who wrote a paper called "Nobody Ubers in the Hood." And he pointed out that Uber drivers, unbeknownst to those people, don't necessarily go into certain neighborhoods, and exposed a lot of things. It's a really good paper to look it up. His name is Michael Hardy. Things like that are definitely part of this. And I find it interesting, Rhett, that in the technology space, in the internet and its development, we're dealing with this identity issue that's at the core of how the internet was built, right? That built the giant platforms that we're on every day. And then in the social space, what are we contending with? The nature of identity, racial identity, social identity, economic identity. I mean, all of these are part and parcel of the same conversation. So I think that if people keep peeling at this, you'll see that behind privacy, there's some fundamental things that we're also confronting in the social space. And eventually the tech and the social space are going to go like this. And we're already seeing digital government transformation, right? We feel like we just got to digital business transformation, and now we're jumping into digital government transformation. So it's happening really quickly.
Talk about how do you think 5G is going to impact everything?
So two things about 5G, and then I'll give you my take. The thing about 5G is you still have to be hooked up to a backhaul. So 5G doesn't actually go all the way to the ends of the earth. I think a lot of people think that 5G, because of the bandwidths, will mean that you'll have Wi-Fi level quality everywhere in the world, and that's just not true. We need physical infrastructure. There's a couple companies doing really smart things with solar powered routers that you can just basically drop from a plane and they'll pick up 5G. But there has to be a backhaul. So 5G is not the world getting internet. It's just really, really fast speeds for the current internet. So don't think about it like, 5G means that the internet is everywhere. Think about it like 5G means that where the internet is, it's much more powerful. So what would that unlock? Well, it would unlock anything that we didn't have the power to process, that wasn't a sustainable business model to process. So think about being able to stream 4 things at once. So I don't know why you would want to necessarily do that, but you could, right? And then high intensity workloads, or high performance computing, HPC, that's coming out. So I see 5G in the identity space as making it possible to process so many more things with the bandwidth to do so, that the hardware that's already there doesn't get slowed down by the networking that's about to be there. So concretely, Rhett, we're talking about IoT that previously we had either a hardware or a networking blocker to build. The hardware is pretty much done now. Some of the chipsets coming out are incredible, and we're talking about beyond Moore's law, and so I'm not really worried about the hardware. That'll be solved for. The networking hasn't been solved for, and so a lot of business cases that were held back by this, suddenly those are going to make sense. So what are we talking about? Well, some of the highest performance computing that you need to do in the context of big data is machine learning.
Right.
And machine learning on the edge means that you're not hooked up to the really big chipset, servers that can just chug through petabytes of data, which you'd find in a public cloud today. So you can do that, but the networking is going to be slowing you down to be able to do that on the edge and then transfer the information. There's a really good story about this. Cruise ships, another industry that's just under fire right now. Cruise ships, when they adopted cloud computing, what a lot of them decided to do was to have a cloud in their ship, in the actual boat, and they weren't going to connect that to the cloud except when it docks into port. And so you have you have a local cloud, and everyone can connect to the Wi-Fi on the boat. But then all the information that collects, there are hard drives in the boat, and then they dump out to the cloud when you come back into port. And they use physical. Amazon has Snowball. There's briefcases that you can use to do this, and so it's like delivering a physical letter. 5G will make it so that we don't have to necessarily do that. It'll be more instantaneous, be faster. The networking will be able to handle that. So all of the machine learning necessary to do identity verification, validation, and the probabilistic stitching of who you are and what you're doing. 5G is going to answer your question at a very verbose way, Rhett. All of that is a long-winded way of saying that 5G is going to make it so that there's more things that can be learned about you faster and transferred to other systems. Mm-hmm. Last thing, I'll just put a parenthetical here. Identity. If you take the word and you break it down, ID entity. There's this word within the word entity, right? Entity resolution is a huge topic right now for IoT, because if I were to give this mug an identity, a serial code or something, so that we know what this mug is doing in a database, that would be an entity. The mug doesn't have it's not a person, right? So identity, entity, ID coming from ideology, it means you. So entities there's many more entities. There's as many as you want. Right. You could put a label, grab your label maker, print out a number and put it all over anything you want. You could create an entity. The question is, how do you resolve those things? So I think 5G is going to be really interesting in that respect, because the computing necessary to take guesses at those things being the same and saying, oh, that's the same coffee cup, or Max is the same person in these two contexts, that's where 5G, I think, will intersect the identity space.
That's fascinating. We're out of time, man. I could talk about this all day, because it's just really fascinating where we're going, and we're not done. I got 8 more questions I wanted to ask you, so that I'd written down. But so I have to have you on again, Max.
Hey, I'd be happy to come back, Rhett. Thanks for the conversation. It was great.
Just have to have you back on, and actually have you back on too when there are updates about where the laws are and what's going on. Maybe periodically have you on to sort of catch up where the law is and what's changing. So
let's talk sometime in the spring when I'll just leave you with this thought. There's no enforcement arm for any of the data privacy right now. There are proposals in front of lawmakers right now to make those. So a data privacy agency is being discussed. So when that comes out, there'll be a lot more to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for the update. Thank you for sort of bringing us up to speed on what's going on and what the outlook looks like. Thank you for spending some time with us on Power Lunch Live today. We have another program coming up at the top of the hour, so we'll see you in just a few minutes. We've got Ariel Garten on today, neuroscientist and innovator and entrepreneur, and we're going to talk about her Untangled podcast and some of her work at Muse. So anyway, we'll see you here in about 20 more minutes. Until then, if you don't join us, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow.